Okay, and we are recording. And Laura, would you like to say anything at the beginning of this recording to preface it?
Yes, welcome to all of you who are able to be here, and to those of you who can't, we hope you take the time to listen to this recording. We're first going to talk about the results of a survey, anonymous results a survey we gave to our membership recently about their employment information. And then we will follow up with Anthony Rispo leading us in a discussion of and questions about the AGO employment handbook that has recently come out and that he worked on. So Justin, do you want to speak for a moment about the survey?
Sure. So I'll speak about the survey, and it just kind of gives everybody an idea of how we're responding to things. You know, we're a year out from COVID. We're not yet post-COVID. We're mid-COVID, pre-COVID, really, depending on how you want to look at that. But just to get an idea of our chapter, we did have 23 members return by mail or by the online survey, return some responses to that. So let's take a look at that so everybody can see. So first, looking at the status, it looks like as though most of our membership is currently employed part-time. We do have, some that did respond as substitutes or full-time, and we do have a number of people who are members who are unemployed at this point that may have been as a result of COVID, or was most likely as a result of COVID with the closures that were happening. So that gives us an idea. Most of those who identified their role, and people could indicate more than one role that they were serving as, were music directors or organists, along with choir directors. We see it being something where I think the reason that other attributes were much lower is simply our rate of return for this particular survey. So I would not make too much out of that. The reasons for the changes, it seems like as if it's a cross section, really, up until I put one in that we received from in print. It was exactly 25% all the way across the board of the reasons as to why there was some type of employment change that had happened in COVID land. I'll call it, for lack of a better term. But so it seems to go across whether or not it was closures or health changes or organizational changes that were out there. As far as needs within our chapter, we do see that most members in the chapter are not necessarily seeking employment at this time, though we do have a few who are interested. So it seems as though between our particular advertisements for jobs or for substitute needs, that we're running probably close to what we may actually in a non-pandemic setting, percentage-wise. And then looking ahead, it looks as though there's a real mixed opportunity of people that are saying yes or no to whether or not they would lead worship services remotely or by recording. It seems as though most people who did respond, and I'll highlight that not everybody responded to this particular question, everybody's kind of on the fence, and I think that that's a repeating pattern in most of my experiences and in our discussions from other presentations. People are like, either it works really well or I hate it a lot and I don't want to be a part of it. And so I think that's really the reason for that particular response to the question. So those are our very brief survey results to get an idea and a pulse on what's going on within the Central Hudson Valley chapter. Does anybody have questions about that before I close this out and turn it over to Anthony?
Just on the mechanics of the survey itself, I think it'd be smart to resend the invitation to complete the survey, because I don't think everybody looks at their email every day. And this may have kind of gotten overlooked.
Yeah,
I don't think deliberately omit doing the survey if they saw it.
Understood. And I think, Laura, when we sent out this recording with the discussion, providing the link then to say if you've not already taken part of the survey, please consider that. And it will provide people with an option. And perhaps by the time we release everything, we'll have a few more, and then we can confirm our thoughts and theories or tell ourselves that we're completely wrong. I'm fine with it either way. Let the people speak. So with
That
that, I
sounds
will.
good.
I will stop sharing and I will turn this over to Anthony, unless, Eric, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
I was going to say just before, I mean, I think that maybe category on the last one could grow.
Mhm.
I mean, I know that things are changing at First Lutheran, and it's almost like every week and certainly every month, the process and the method and the ideas change.
Yep.
So it's almost like you have to keep agreeing or being enthusiastic about trying something new, which isn't a terribly bad thing. It might keep us younger, but you know,
So unlike the church.
flexibility is still paramount, and I think, you know, the only honest answer is maybe, because we don't know what's coming.
Yep. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I'll say that as somebody who up until a week ago, where our church is reopening this coming Sunday to host in-person worship that will be live streamed, so people have their choice of what they would like to do. And we're at the point where all of a sudden everybody has decided that they're comfortable with some form of singing. Now, mind you, the way that this is going to be done, this is the most sanitized version of it possible. So we will have a soloist or we will have a duet who will sing, that will have the face masks for singers. They will be singing with their music stands that have a plexiglass that's the size of basically the outline of a top half of a body that's there, and they'll be 12 to 20 feet away from everybody. So the feeling was generally, well, if anybody gets it at that point, they were just going to get it. There's not much more other than not singing at all, and that was the compromise versus doing the recorded singing. One thing that became very clear in our congregation is that, they liked it, they appreciated it, but the disembodied music is something that's driven, I think, most people just up a wall, for lack of a better term, is like being there, hearing it, but not seeing. This is very interesting to me, not seeing the artist or the musician perform it live, and just listening to a recording collectively was offsetting for most of those who were there. So just something of note.
A question?
Yes, Laura.
Is congregational hymn singing going to be discouraged? Are your soloists going to be singing hymns that are familiar?
Not necessarily. They may be singing hymns, but congregationally, we're not encouraging singing. People may hum along. People may look at it in their book. If they get too rowdy, I'll just take a baton and slap it and say, now, sit down, be quiet. To many, this is a reverse form of the Reformation. That's what happened with pre-Palestrina, right? The music got so complicated, nobody could understand it, nobody could follow it, nobody wanted to do everything, and everybody left, and that's really was the feet to pavement on the Reformation. And here we are again, as in our case, a Reformed congregation. So I'm just like, I'm waiting for it. So
it's just our church is planning to open in-person outdoor services starting May 16th, with the idea that if we have any cantors or small groups, they are going to be singing music that is not familiar to the congregation. No, very intentionally. In fact, James and I have been tasked with finding, Sanctus, Gloria, other things that we would like to ultimately have the congregation learn, but that they do not yet know. So if we find 4 of those Glorias, let's say, we'll do one each a week, so they will not be familiar to people yet, except subliminally as they've heard them.
Understood. Well, great points, and it really leads everything into, at this point, for Anthony. Here's your segue. We present unto you all of the issues and crises that we have been managing on a daily basis, and now you can tell us how that relates to the employment handbook from the AGO. Turn it over to you, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Justin, and everybody here. So this handbook it's a wonderful supplemental guide, and I'm honored to have been given the opportunity to work on it. It's something that I think it's been a pervasive sort of issue for folks in our profession with this salary guideline stuff, right? When we had to get rid of the guidelines for employment, That's obviously a whole logistical legal thing that I know, I would say a very little bit about, but on the surface, know some of the key points. But if you, just so you have, if you want to refer to a really good resource, it's the April 2021 TAO. It's going to be James Thomashire's piece on why we're not a union and everything about the FTC and some things about something called the ministerial exception. So some housekeeping things just to keep in mind the reason why this document was created, because there is a need for it. There is a need for it, especially, what a great time during this pandemic to have some kind of guide with which to refer and moving into opening up and everything. And also just a great thing to have for your current position in your church, just good knowledge in here. So again, it's a supplemental guide. It's not a be all end all. It's not the gospel. And it was the Committee on Career Development and Support collaborated with the Association of Church Musicians, Madison Chapter, American Guild of Organists. And I'm just going to go through two key pages. I'm going to share my screen now, if I can have permission to do that. There's 2 pages I want to just point out that will be very helpful. Let's see, we've got a lot of stuff here. Is that it? Is that it? See my, I think this is it right here. Okay. So on page 13, I just want to point you into this direction. Compensating musicians in religious institutions. This is a big question because obviously we don't have that guide anymore. I just want to highlight here. I guess I can't highlight it. It jumped me. On page 13, there's an appendix that you can go to for some resources, for some help to figure out what you could be asking in terms of compensation. Where is it? I'm sorry. I had a little technical difficulty with this because it jumped me to the other page.
I saw it flash by.
Yeah, right over here. I'm not going to do it again because it's going to do it. I thought I could highlight it. It might be a useful document that what the time commitments will be to plan, prepare, practice, and perform service music, and to carry out all their duties expected from the position. So for additional information, please see these 2 helpful resources on the AGO website. So I'm going to leave this up here for a quick second so you can, page 13, so you can see where to refer. One of the big things that we're talking about in the Committee on Career Development and Support is the support part. We realize that there, obviously because of this pandemic and the just displacement and all the emotional distress and all just the turbulence all around, we realize that support is a huge need right now, and that goes beyond just not to minimize this document. This is an excellent document, but that goes beyond a document. It's the AGO headquarters get they receive calls from members of grievances, people who have lost their jobs, people who are not sure what to do when it comes to technology, albeit there's been a learning curve. People are getting better at that, but we can't assume that everybody's just in tip-top shape. This is still very stressful for many people. So we're building and figuring out ways to fill the holes so that folks can get in touch with the right person, the right department, to direct them in ways that would be beneficial to them. Now, one of the things we can't do, obviously, is we can't, act as a union and we can't sort of negotiate your job with you or what's going the goings on in your job, but we can with this new document, and with coming up and coming resources, we can help navigate through some difficult circumstances. So that's a really big thing that the department, the committee is focusing on. And then there's another page here. So there's page 13 with reference to the Appendix A, ideas for organists seeking employment. And then there's another resource here. It's components of equitable compensation for musicians in religious institutions. That's page 15. So that's down here. Page 15 is another one where you can find information for, if you've done annual reviews with your supervisor, that can be very helpful. And it could help, inform both parties where, areas of strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things that we talked about a lot when we were creating this handbook was this supplemental guide was, how to have a sense of autonomy when it comes to your position, because there's not that outside protection or somebody advocating for you in a union or something of that nature. And because churches, even though function in a bond as a denomination, they act autonomously, church by church by church, and can create their own sorts of policies internally in the system itself. So there's very little protection for us in this profession, insofar as equitable, a climate in a workplace. So one of the things that we can do is we can draft our own expectations in terms of salary, reflective of the market value, of course. That's one of the things that's highlighted in this document also, that, looking around at seeing what is going on in the market with teaching and other industries, what are people making in these different areas of employment. Experience, really getting a whole list of things together that matches your fit for the position. Or if you want to do your own kind of self-review, maybe putting something together, and when it comes time to review your documents with your employer, whether it's just a document between the two of you, or if you have a full-out contract, whatever that may be, being an active participant in that process is something that is highlighted in this handbook, and it's something we strongly suggest. Also, like mentioned here in this page, page 15 of the handbook, suggesting that you have some kind of review. It really helps you, it really helps with accountability and helps show your employer that you're ready to put yourself sort of in the limelight when it comes to some constructive criticism. And for my, based on my own experience, and I'm sure several folks here in this meeting, I'm sure that is something that you could attest to, that putting yourself in that vulnerable situation could be, no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been somewhere, it could be a positive thing. Other than that, we were joking a little bit about weddings before, about, the wedding party arriving late and feeling the urge to play the Jeopardy theme song and improvising on it when they haven't showed up for 40 minutes or so. I think it's very important to review that part of this as well, the wedding guidelines on page 19. One of the things that we did not mention in this document, because we had to be very careful, this could be a recurring question, well, why did we not mention certain things, has a lot to do with those FTC guidelines. and appearing as if we were a different establishment. Establishment that we're not. We're a nonprofit, and we have to be very careful with our language so as not to project that we're a 501c5, which is different from a 501c3, which we are, 501c3. So I'm gonna stop my blabbering and I'm gonna open up the floor to anybody here, and those are the key things I wanted to address, and let me pass it over to any of you who want to add something with your own experience, your own advice, you've read this handbook, I'm sure you have stuff you want to talk about. And if anybody watching this after the fact, because it's recorded, if you want to get in touch with me so I can refer you to somebody, if I can't answer your question, then don't hesitate. So there are things that I can't answer directly. And there are things that are developing, and not that I can't talk about them, it's just we haven't really begun our first phases in full transparency. We're waiting for our next meeting to do that. But this is something that we're really wanting to create. We want to create a better way in which members can reach out for support as it relates to their employment. Specifically. So that's all. I'll just end there and open it up.
Anthony, not to tread on anybody else's questions yet or anything like that, but just for those who are tuning in, we've known that the FTC settlement, right, is something that's been negotiated for the better part of, I want to say 5, maybe 10 years, right? So for those who are not familiar with it, the Federal Trade Commission oversees the relationships between businesses, and their primary focus is in enforcing fair practices, right? Like this is like their guiding principle of that. And so it's very confusing for individuals as to why the AGO and the FTC are even had to communicate over anything, especially when you consider the fact that most of the employers for members, right, they don't consider themselves businesses. We may not consider themselves businesses. Is there anything that the AGO at a national level, I know that there's been a ton of resources that have been put out to kind of explain that away, but is there anything specifically that the AGO at the national level wants to highlight for those that may be tuning into this and might not be familiar with the overall, context out of which this came, right? Like this was not one day the AGO sat down and said, let's make an employee handbook with guides in it. And then I'll let you go back to that, but I just wanted to ask that question so that there might be some context.
Yeah, so it's really, it happened, as you said, it's fairly recent actually, right? This whole situation. So the question is more context? Is there, okay.
So just a brief overview of the context from which this came out. Thank you.
So there was a salary, and I remember when I was, oh my goodness, I remember when I was taking organ lessons, 16 years old, I remember seeing the salary guideline and seeing the degrees, your bachelor's degree, this, that, your PhD. I remember it said PhD, I went right to PhD, the highest, said something like 93,000 a year. I was like, oh, this is this is a great, my focus was not, it was not solely on, okay, making 93,000. I was like, this is great though. I'm taking organ lessons. I'm going to go to school for this, and 93,000 buckaroos, but in reality, so there's two parts to this answer really quickly. The reality is that that's not a reality in most cases right now for most people in any industry in America, with the exception of obviously a few. But the other reality is that the FTC was able to pick up on this, and I would be making something up if I were to tell you how. I cannot remember that specifically. The right person to ask that question to would be James Thomas Schauer. And I can say though that once they did find this out, the FTC, that they demanded essentially that, you know, there was no, the AGO was put up against a wall because, I mean, people wonder, well, couldn't you compromise? Couldn't you just meet with them and bring in your lawyers and your team of people to just like come up with something so that we can have this 501c5 status, you know, to have representation? And, you know, sure, you know, that could have happened, but as far, from what I understand, and I believe this is the case, the legal fees, everything would have just, it would have just put everything over the edge. It wouldn't have made sense. So one quick thing, I say the best thing to do is to refer to April 2021 TAO, his article. It's on page 8 of the April 2021 TAO, and he explains everything. Some key highlights though. So I will just say, the Federal Trade Commission says that a C3, to be a C3, we would be violating antitrust laws if we were to publish salary guidelines. So back to that salary guideline that I saw growing up, that would be a violation. So not permitted to have a grievance process that might result in putting certain churches on a so-called blacklist, etc. So the other part of it is that there's another part of it that I'm not going to really go into because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but everything is connected here, and hence this new document. One of the things that I'm advocating for, and we're going to be moving on, is developing is information webinars on the ministerial exception, which is confusing. Essentially, it says churches can do anything. It doesn't matter. They can fire you, hire you. It doesn't matter if we huddle together and try to do a union. It's basically like a moot point when it comes to this particular dyad. You're not going to have the kind of luck, unfortunately, having a union or something like that when it comes to the institution of the church because of the ministerial exception. Now, one thing that can happen is, so we cannot have a model contract or model contract provisions because regulatory agencies like the FTC won't permit it. However, we can provide very extensive documentation about what should be in an agreement between an organist and that person's employer. And we are currently in the process of creating that document. So as per my last statements, we can have model documents and things that could, and examples of salary, not example of, scratch that, examples of contracts to which we can refer and negotiate with a potential employer. That's fine, and that's what this resource helps us with. So I hope that answered some.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very helpful, especially for some who are, you know, walking into this maybe not having that context, other than something was there and then disappeared. I appreciate that.
One other quick thing, though, is absolutely my pleasure. One other fast thing on a positive note. If we were, I'm going to read this very quickly. If we were to become a union, we would not accept tax-deductible charitable donations. And apparently, the AGO has received some substantial donations lately, so that's something that we would lose. But again, just to close my points, I reiterate, April 2021 TAO, James Thomasschauer's article is really helpful. So.
Thank you so much. And I think Susan had her hand up long before I asked the question to derail everything. So
Yeah, my main question is, James Thomasschauer's article does not contain the guidelines, but it refers to them and helps to give background about them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It goes through. Yes, to answer your question, yes. It's just,
So,
it clarifies, yeah.
So where are the guidelines available themselves?
That's an excellent question. They are, as far as I can remember, I have to check again. I believe the agreement is listed on the national website. I believe it's there. You can see for yourself, and it's public too. You mean the agreement between the FTC and the AGO?
No, I'm talking about the document that James Summersour is referring to in his article.
I think she means the one you've been waving around, the one you worked on.
Exactly.
The booklet. Your new book. No, not that. You have a copy of your new booklet?
This one.
Yes, that one.
This is
Yeah.
on the web. This is on the. Go on, Laura. I'm sorry.
It's on the AGO HQ website under careers.
You can also access it if you go to the if you go to the here. I will show you where it is. So if you go to the home page, the picture of the booklet will be there. You just click on it and it'll open the PDF. Let me find it.
Hold it still for a minute. Okay. All right. Thank you.
We had an early copy of it that Anthony was able to share with us that I remember reading cover to cover a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago when that first came out.
And here it is. So this is the, I'm sorry, am I muted? No.
No, you're good.
This is the, okay, this is the homepage. And this is a video here. This is a video of the webinar that we had. Right here is where you can click and open up to the document. So back on the home page, the picture of the document is right here. Just click and it'll take you right to the PDF.
And you can save a PDF on your device, which is what
you can. You can save a PDF on your device by going right over here. And then saving it right there. Or you can print it right away, right over here. And page 13 and 15, those are the ones that I, let me stop sharing right now, sorry. That have the useful appendix references just for your own knowledge.
For what it's worth, you can pass on my compliments to whoever did your typesetting. I thought it was very well laid out. It's very gorgeous to read.
Isn't it? I love the colors too. I don't know who it was, to be honest with you. They did a really great job on putting this together.
It was good.
I was part of the brain phase, and it was like sorry.
You know, it's interesting because I had a job many years ago where this document would have been very useful. It was just, well, it was almost like teaching the church what an organist does.
Yeah.
And what goes into the job, you know, other than showing up on Sunday morning and playing hymns and being at everyone's beck and call for a funeral, for a funeral. Those are the things they knew, but they didn't know anything about what it took in order to be able to do those things. And so I think having that codified in a booklet like this, it would have been very helpful 30 years ago to me. My current job, they know a lot more about it. Yes, Laura?
Anthony, do you know if anyone at AGO headquarters or anyone on the committee who drew up the handbook has gotten feedback?
You know, the webinar we had a while back, I can't remember, that was several months ago. We had some feedback coming in the comments. And I think it's been really good so far. We're really careful with the language. And I think a few people were still kind of a little upset about the guidelines not being, like the salary guidelines not being, but that's why we're trying to do this education campaign on this whole FTC thing. But generally, yes, I think people have been very pleased with it.
I'll say, with regards to, I know that there's a I think that this will last for years, right? The fact that the salary guide, right, that was available is no longer available, is interesting for two reasons. One, I don't know that really in the time frame in which, by the time that salary guide was made available, so the time that it was taken away, I don't know that it was ever truly accurate. It was kind of it was an idealized, right? That most people didn't qualify. And even if you sat down there, and I'll give my own example, maybe if I looked at like the quarter time of whatever it was that I was doing, it got kind of close, but it was never there, regardless of the areas that I was working in. And I think, so I find it interesting that people are upset that a document that that they based so much on, right? Like that was essentially, I think that was their one quote bargaining chip, right? When they went to go and negotiate a new job or a contract renewal, they felt like that bargaining chip was taken away. But two, you actually get a much more accurate bargaining chip now through things like social media, right? Like I don't know how many times people have seen, what do you charge for a wedding, right? What do you charge for your funeral? What is your average whatever? And you'll get responses from, around the globe, around the US, or, whatever area it is that you're looking for, right? And then you see all kinds of these international disparities coming up, but then realizing that, in the UK, the system there is completely different from how it's kind of like if you were to go to Montreal and leave a tip on the table and everybody looks around and goes, what's that for? So it's interesting to me that we have this kind of, it's almost this false dichotomy that without that salary guide, we're not able to negotiate for ourselves in a fair way. But when really, I think it's more about, I think what would be helpful out of this are those resources that help a choir director or an organist or a pianist, right, to figure out how to best present themselves to get their, almost like a career coach, right? Where it's just like you've gotten through all these things, you've gotten your branding, how you're going to best present yourself so that you get what your value is, right?
Yeah.
Which
makes a lot of
which the unfortunate thing is that is so alien to this profession, largely because, whenever you go into a place to try and do that, at least in the last 50 years, right, it's been like, well, you're doing this for God, right? Or for whatever, whatever it is. Or, if it's academia, well, what about the students? It's like, there's always this, it's one of those rare professions where somebody always cites a non-existent or non-interested stakeholder to justify not paying you, which is very unique to this particular field. It's hard to take it up with management, so to say.
It's lovely to be that altruistic, but I still have to pay the mortgage, it's like.
And to Eric, to your point, on what Justin just said about, about this whole problem of this false idea of what the salary guidelines were portraying. To your point, Eric, I'm not trying to make a point for you, but based on your point, this is a long time coming for the AGO to do something like this, because how are members, how are folks supposed to really know what to do? Like Justin, to your point, like this is foreign, and so it's just such a good thing that there's this stimulation, this awareness of, I think, this was pre-COVID work too, but because of COVID also just sort of stimulating this conversation of, well, what about my job security? And how do I navigate around something that, frankly, and this is sort of like a hush-hush topic, I think it's becoming more of an open conversation, the trajectory of church attendance and, what is it going to look like for future church musicians? What is it really going to look like, when the churches are drying up in assets and funds and all this stuff, and having to outsource to the point where they're not really autonomous? And so it's like, yeah, we can only evolve from here on in and to help members now and together, all of us, members in the
Right.
future, mentor, how to set yourself up the best way possible. When I was younger, I know I'm still young, but when I was much younger, I was like in this land of, oh, I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. And I'm going to blah, 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 blah. Everything's going to be fine. And now, I'm 31 and you think, how am I going to set myself up? So it's like, especially now looking at and Eric, Laura, Susan, you came into a time where maybe you could say this, you could speak for yourselves, but where it didn't seem like the church was in sort of a bit of a crisis in terms of where it's going to be in the next 5 years, right?
I never came into it being where being the church musician was the primary source of my income. So
right.
It's a different sort of thing. But in answer to your other question, what's going to happen when the congregation fails? The same thing that happens when your business fails. When you work for Ajax Plumbing Supply and they go out of business, well, you look for another job. That's it's exactly what happens in industry. I think sometimes musicians don't have experience at other jobs where how you've already done that annual review. You haven't been through it in other positions to sort of understand how the rest of the world works. And so there may be a perception thing. I mean, how many people were actually paid according to those salary guidelines ever, even when they existed? I think not too many, unless you happen to work in Manhattan.
I don't know who they asked.
Or,
I can maybe address that point from the an opposite end.
okay.
Because I have for so many years been the clearinghouse for people wanting to employ organists. I remember the dismay among employers when the salary guidelines were withdrawn. They suddenly had no idea how to place their salaries. They were asking me for guidance, and I kept having to say, sorry, I can't tell you about this because of the FTC. They didn't know about the FTC. All they wanted was, somebody please tell me how much I should offer this organist. They were really at sea.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
now most of them just say salary negotiable and leave it at that, which I think is a cop out at best.
Which then forces a situation, and I can say this having worked with at least 3 AGO chapters, anybody who sees salary commensurate with experience, right, says, never mind, if it's not out there up front. And this happens in the private sector world too, and I think Eric can attest to this. If you see something's offered and it's a 6-month contract with Cisco and it doesn't have a price range attached to it, you're like, there's no point. They clearly want an intern. They clearly want somebody who has no intent of sticking around. So why would I even, apply? Although it could be something that develops into more.
Yeah, there's a shocking amount of job offers that are out there to take advantage of you.
Yep.
And so in some ways it's no different. I think that what the AGO has done by helping people quantify what the job entails gives people with reasonable mathematical skills the ability to say, okay, $25 an hour, chunk, or $30, or to relate it to, well, how much does another professional make? Even if they're salaried, what does that come out to per hour?
Right.
And you can use that based on these numbers of hours to get an idea that will scare them, because you can't.
Yeah, and another thing that's tricky for this profession is again the fact that no matter how structured the denomination itself is an edifice. You have the whole denomination, ELCA, the Episcopal Church of America. No matter their policies, each church. This is not so different in business also, but you're talking a very distinct feature where you have this national thing with autonomous, little pockets of their own ideas of how to do things. And it's like, you go from church to church and, well, sorry, we can't offer you that 60 grand from up the street. We don't have the membership. So it's that other factor of, well, you're working, you have, getting organists, getting church musicians, I should really say, to understand this from the perspective of that model, of that business model, which I know is an icky thing to talk about for a lot of folks, but like, I think architecturally speaking, if we can help people in the profession understand this from that dry of a perspective, like that this is how it's structured. And if the income if it's not coming in, then we can't pay, we cannot fund it. I had a conversation with a friend about this, and this is another thing that happens with younger people in the profession, is this somewhat of this resentment where I went to school, I spent all this money on my education. And this is not uncommon across the board now, of course, with the way things are. But I spent all this money. Did I waste my time? I got a degree. I was supposed to land a good job. Well, not so, not really, not 100%. It's not guaranteed, especially in this line of work, because there's not that line of protection. Because again, that word, the ministerial exception, because unlike other industries, I mean, there are tons of regulations and stipulations and gatekeepers in other industries for sure, but the institution of religion in America is way more protected than anything. So I think we're at a turning point, and I'm really trying my best in the committee that I'm a member of to really ride home this point that we have to implement these education factors into this organization, architectural examples of churches and how to start from that place. Knowing your worth is a little nebulous. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to think about, but I think people need tangible, to Eric's point, something to quantify. And especially in a time of such distress, we need more of that. So any ideas are welcome. If any of you ever want to process some ideas together, that'd be great.
I was going to say one thing. So we talked about the ministerial exception, right? Which really is, at the crux of this. And just for context, right? We talk about the loss of the salary guide, but the flip side to that too is my wife is a minister, also went to school. It wasn't cheap, right? And there's all this time and effort that's put in there, and you have this weird relationship where from one job to the next, you might not necessarily remain in the same community, and things work differently in different denominations, right? And just as an example, within the Dutch Reformed tradition and denomination, right? And this goes that way. Basically, the Reformed, the UCC, the Presbyterians, and the ELCA Lutherans have the same general structure of how they do this. And they set for their ministers a minimum salary that changes by classes, right? It's a guideline that goes from, so New York City will have its own whatever versus, Albany classes, or, and it can go either way, right? So in that range, right, the AGO salary guide, people would stare to go, oh, that's obscene. We're never going to pay that, or we'll just pay them for quarter time, or better yet, my favorite is, well, if that's how much they said you should get for 10 hours, we'll just hire you for 5 hours. But then they want 10 to 20 hours worth of work done, right? Like that's an ongoing thing. So in this ministerial exemption, right, when you work with clergy, there's this minimum. And so it becomes, people become very, the term I'll use is anemic. The response is anemic to when a minister says, yeah, I have done that, and that is the minimum wage, but I've also got this many years of experience, or I'm in demand in these areas. And what will happen is, the local congregations will go, yeah, but it said the minimum. So we're going to pay that, because isn't that what we're supposed to pay you? Right? There is no maximum. In theory, they could pay $1 million a year. We're all in the wrong line of work, but you know what I mean? So this is that flip.
There should be ranges.
What was that?
There aren't, but there should be ranges. This was a huge thing within IBM.
Yep.
They paid more they'd always claim they paid exactly the same amount for the same job grade, no matter where the site was. But of course, it cost a great deal more to live out here than it did
Right.
to live in Rochester, Minnesota. So what I must confess, it kind of surprised me, but what happened when I moved out here was I suddenly got a promotion, which put me into a grade that allowed the salary to match my cost of living between the two places, because they couldn't leave me where I was and pay me what was the going rate out here, you know, and it was purely an administrative shift of grades simply to handle that problem. So whatever you call it, it still happens, you know. That's the amazing, you know. Let me put it this way. Church musicians are not unique in most of these discussions. It's just, it's a different conversation because the employer is less aware. And
Right.
frankly has less resources to deal with it. I mean, are any of us working in churches that are swimming in money?
No.
Need I say more?
And you know, one of the things we wanted to make clear in this document, or strongly suggest, is during the search, to really make sure that you have somebody who knows a thing or two about this profession. And that was something that I happened across in my in a former position. Before I arrived, they wanted a couple wanted to be a part of the search. One of them happened to study with a prominent teacher back in, I think he's in his upper 70s now, this gentleman, and so he studied in Manhattan with a teacher who Alec Whiten. Okay, fine. And they wouldn't let him be in the process. So I think it's something that we all brought to the table, and I think I could safely assume that it's something that everyone here in this forum would feel congruent with this idea of, hey, you know, let's bring somebody on board who knows what they're doing. So hopefully in this document, hopefully clergy and personnel and, you know, anybody else involved in the system will take that seriously and really humble themselves to listen to people who know what they're talking about, so that there can be less triangulation and more transparency before things hit the fan, which tends to happen in that kind of a system. So
Speaking of triangulation.
I think we can summarize it to say, I think the guidelines are a step forward.
Yeah.
And
you're right.
And in the context of the organization that we are, and perhaps more cognizant of the employment situation and the nature of this job being slightly different than the nature of a job with a startup where they just put out a big stock offering and brought in enough money to hire like crazy, you know, those kind of things.
Right.
It's a different world. And like it or not, I mean, we have to know that going into it.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
like your organist with stock options, though. That would be, no, sorry. I was going to say, Anthony, to your point, you were talking about, you know, we don't allow qualified people in some situations. Qualified people aren't allowed into those discussions and those reviews of individuals. And then we also have people that they are qualified, but we have those situations, right, where if you were, and Eric will appreciate this, if you're out in the real world, right, and you hired a business consultant, and the business consultant was very ardent on achieving whatever their idea was and not necessarily the best possible outcome for everybody, normally you would simply fire that business consultant, or you'd pay them twice the amount of money and blame everybody else when it goes belly up. But I've seen that happen too within organizations, and Anthony, I'm sure you have, and others that are here too. You know, we had a situation where one of the institutions I work at, there was a couple that used to be the director and the organist, worked together for 30 years, built the program. And then we had a traumatic sudden loss of the director, and, you know, I'm still there, and we're working through things and we're trying to put stuff together. And of course, they were going to ask the former director to be a part of this because they had an idea of what was there. Well, the former director then insisted on their spouse also being part of it. So now it's a 5-member panel. It was 4. It became a 5-member panel where 40% of the vote, right, for anything that was discussed was in one household, right? And it was focused on how things worked when they ran everything and their 30 years of experience. So what unfortunately happened is that institution ended up in a situation where they boxed themselves into a corner of gearing a job description around what was done the last 30 years with no vision towards the future. It was, the concern was, well, how do we preserve everything that we had without thinking forward, right? And
Oh, okay.
I think your comment about knowing the lay of the land going in, getting qualified people, but then also finding people that actually have my hope for any religious institution post-COVID is that they will take all their job descriptions and their strategic plans and shred them so that they may actually have one that's a little bit more representative of reality. Anybody who has a strategic plan that was written, February of 2020 or earlier, or job description, it just needs to go. There's no point in ever looking at it ever again because we're all past that point. And so I would hope that really that be a focus. And I think the practice of, formerly I was involved in places where I was fortunate to work where I would write my job description on my way out the door and hand that to the hiring committee. And then they would compare it to what was written at the time at which I arrived and go, ooh, right? And all of a sudden realize that one of these things has to go. Either did we really, really value that and we want the next person to do that also, and we expect that? Was that a unique thing that happened? Can we afford to have all these things done, right? And I think that's going to be, this tool from the AGO, I think will be helpful to those that are going to traverse that. But maybe that may be a separate document unto itself, maybe for institutions. Not that the AGO is going to tell people how to run their show, right? But simply a 1 or 2 page document that's another appendix, that's a guide for those institutions that just discusses things along those lines, or best practices of offboarding and onboarding, right? And through that process, that may be something that actually enhances that document and means that it's not great if you have one side of a negotiation going in with ideas and support and some kind of vision, because it means that they're either going to sell it to the other side and nobody's really sure of what they're doing, or it's going to be a one-sided conversation.
It's just the suggestion of having an appendix that approaches the other point of view, well, not point of view, but the employer's
Part of the equation, yeah.
Part of the equation, something that, right, that makes, I think that's something that should be brought to the attention of this committee for sure, and any other, because I think that you're right. Any agreement that is sort of on this, even seemingly so, like even though this document does its best to facilitate some kind of like co-equal thing, it could be interpreted, who knows? It could be interpreted as still a one-sided thing, and I think that would be a good idea. And I just wanted to say really quick, just for the record, I made a little mistake at the beginning when I said who created this. I said the Association of Church Musicians Madison Chapter. That was not correct. This handbook was adapted from that chapter. This was created by the Association of Church Musicians and the American Guild of Organists. So just that correction. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Anthony, who served on this board that was with you on this project?
Okay, so Vincent Carr, he was the one, he oversaw the whole thing when I joined. And David Lamb at first. And we had, who else do I remember? Doris Dabrowski. And I don't know if anybody knows of her. She's actually a lawyer. I can't really remember any, but it's published, and the contributors are published here. Some of them didn't. They weren't there for most of it, but for some of it, and everybody had something to contribute. So, but it's on page 1 of the document. You can see all the names. But Vincent Carr was the one who was kind of overseeing everything.
Pretty typical. Consultants come in, give what they're good at, you know, keep you on track. Others go off and do.
Yeah.
Might as well have had PwC in to, so if they don't know anything about church musicians, but.
I think this has been a great introduction and overview of what the AGO has put together so far. Anthony, are there any questions from anybody else? And then we can conclude at least the recording portion of this. I dropped some questions into the chat, but I think honestly, most of them have been addressed, or we can refer people to the documents to assist with that. I had just thrown those questions out at the very beginning of this so that I could hold on to them. But I think we've actually talked through most of those in the grander scheme of things. Were there any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'm going to stop the recording before we end the meeting and thank everybody who has been a part of this evening, as well as thank those who will be watching this later. So I'm going to stop that now.